All right, it is time for some magic stuff. It's been a bit of a while since I've actually looked at Pantlaza, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the updated deck list now that all the cards from Ixalan have been out for a while, and see what direction we took this in, all right? So, last time I mentioned that I really didn't want to lean too heavily into dinosaurs. I just think that Gishath does the job better. Well, I mean, not necessarily better, but he's already handily in the spot. I maybe Pantlaza could compete with him with a dedicated dinosaur build. I wasn't too terribly interested in exploring that path. So we're gonna mostly be focusing on the Discover ability, which while it can only happen once each turn, we have ways to circumvent that. Totally fine. But yeah, a quick overview of what the deck wants to do. Basically, Pantlaza is just going to be ramping you a ton by pulling, hopefully, ideally, ramp cards off the top, and then you're just going to use a mana sink to win the game. That's our game plan. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got in the deck. So by custom, all right. So there are dinosaurs in the deck. When I included them, I had a certain amount of criteria. Primarily, I either wanted them to have a stat block that was, ideal, in which case, I mean, mana value at least matches the toughness, so we're getting a Discover for however much we paid. In most of these cases, it's actually going to exceed, right? You've got 3 for 4, 3 for 4, 3 for 5, 3 for 5. That's typically going to be what it looks like. Besides that, we also wanted just utility, right? Bronze Beak will exile stuff for us. Dinosaur Egg has a death trigger that will discover more when it dies. Atali is Atali. He's dumb, okay? This is a dumb card, and it's really good in this deck. That said, it is a, I believe, $15 card right now. Actually, it shows the price, doesn't it? I believe it's a $15 card right now. And if you don't want to include it, that's fine. Like, he helps a lot to have, but he is not super necessary. Like, you can just replace him with another ramp spell, another land, draw even. I think before I had him in here, I was using Harmonize, just for a little bit of draw if I were to pull it off the top with Pantlaza. The deck doesn't need him. There are plenty of other ways to win that he's not super necessary, so you'll be fine there. Ripjaw and Runic are conditional card draw. Thrashing Brontodon will, sacrifice something. You sacrifice it, you get rid of an artifact or enchantment. Topiary, look for a land. He actually synergizes really well with Pantlaza, because if you were to flicker him on your opponent's turns, or even if you're on your own turns, if you don't have a dinosaur to play, he will just continuously look for land on top of discovering 4 every time. Carnosaur gives us an additional Discover on entry. Swordtooth, I don't know how often you're going to be making use of this ability, like how often you're going to have more than one land to play a turn. Regardless, the stat block was good enough that I decided it was worth keeping. Plus, when you do get to play that extra land, it feels really good. And Zakama is here just because he is a combo piece. He will make us infinite mana, either with Temur Sabertooth or Sanctum of Eternity to continuously bounce him back to our hand. And then once we have a bunch of mana, we can use a mana sink and hopefully win the game. Flickers. Now, these are just pure flicker. You exile something, you return it immediately. It's great for value, and it's great for protecting your stuff from targeted removal. However, board wipes, these will not dodge. That's fine. That's not our primary purpose for these things. There's only 9 in white that are this sort of effect, which is very sad. Ideally, they're going to print more. The latest one was from Lord of the Rings, so I have hope that more will be printed soon-ish. I'm not sure. In any case, these are very important. Don't replace any of them. You need these badly. Restoration Angel in particular is quite good here because you can flicker it and then flicker Pantlaza, which, if you have some ways to take advantage of creatures entering the battlefield, grants you an extra trigger. Always nice. What I've labeled gas here is basically just stuff that if you were to flip it off the top, you continue your Discover chain, right? If Curse Mirror enters the battlefield, you flicker Pantlaza, or not, sorry. If Curse Mirror enters the battlefield, you have it become a copy of Pantlaza, and then it will die as a state-based action, but you do get another trigger, which it's fine, right? Felidar Guardian and Icewind Stalwart, they flicker Pantlaza when they enter. You get another Discover trigger off of that. Plus, they will bounce, along with Restoration Angel, they will bounce each other infinitely, which again takes advantage of ETB effects, such as Elemental Bond, for example. It'll just draw you infinite cards, which you're not going to get the pieces for that like super often, but when you do get them, it's pretty much a win, unless I guess people have interruption, which they probably will, honestly. I'm going to go for land last, I think, just because I think it's the least interesting bit. Let's go ahead and go to Mass Blink. It's what it says on the tin, right? You flicker something, or sorry, you exile something, it comes back in the end phase. Great for protecting us from board wipes. Otherwise, not super useful for value, because you're not getting that Discover right away. Shout out to Laezel's Acrobatics. If you can roll the 10 to 20 on here, you're basically flickering twice, which, I mean, that's already great on value for us. Glorious Protector does have a foretell, though if you are forced to cast it on your opponent's turn, the same round you foretell it, you are technically paying more. I mean, not technically, you are paying more. But otherwise, you get a bit of a discount, which is nice. Nothing else too interesting in this section. Ghostway is like a $5 card. It might be a little more at this point. I would not recommend dropping it just because we need as many flicker effects as we can get. That said, if you did want to drop it, probably just throw in more card draw to supplement the loss of one of our key pieces. Mass damage. It's, again, what it says on tin. This is where most of our mana sinks are going to go, right? You pump a bunch of mana into Crackle of Power, pump a bunch of mana into Jaya's Immolating Inferno, and then you hit 3 people, or however many with Crackle of Power, right? Cards like Delete, Earthquake, and Rolling Earthquake are more general. Excuse me. They require less mana to be put in, but they hit everything with some, restrictions. No flying here and no not artifact creatures here. But that means they're also going to hit your stuff. They're also going to hit you, which you're not too worried about board states in this game. As long as you have Pantlaza and a Flicker in hand, you are solid. And even if Pantlaza dies, you should have enough mana by the time you're casting one of these things to just recast her. The bigger issue is that you're also taking this damage, so unless you have a way to bring your opponents down, you will just be dying alongside them. Which, I mean, that can be a useful bargaining tool, keep people away from you or you will just blow the game up. I think it's valid. Some people don't like that. I think it's fine. Divine Reckoning and Slaughter the Strong. These are both just pick one creature, destroy the rest. Slaughter the Strong is a little more narrow in that it will probably save most of your creatures, but your really big hitters, like Itali or Trumpeting Carnosaur, will just die. But its primary goal is to keep Pantlaza alive so we can continually flicker her. And then White Sun's Twilight, it's another mana sink, another board wipe. This one will make us a ton of might tokens depending on how much X we put in for X. So like this could easily end us the game if people just don't have a way to clean up the board after you just spawn a fuck ton of mites. Toxic win, but you know what? We built up to it. It's fine. We deserve it. These are just general value pieces. They do a bunch of stuff that I couldn't really categorize very well. Fierce Empath is here to draw our big boys, which, I mean, again, this guy, and this guy. Zendikar is another potential win con. You slum him down when you have a bunch of mana, and then you just pump up all the tokens he makes. Closet and Circle are there to flicker stuff at the end of turn, as they say on the card. Sun's Creation will double your triggers, because they don't double Pantlaza's trigger, they double the actual Discover, which is nice. Some drop power with Elemental Bond and Garruk's Uprising. Again, Elemental Bond can combo off with these two and with Restoration Angel. But otherwise, they're just there for value when you flicker whatever you're flickering. Gelatinous Genesis, I am on the fence on. This one will probably get removed eventually. There are a lot of more effects in the class of, these Earthquake type effects that I would rather have, I think. The only reason Gelatinous Genesis is in here is because it gives you staying power on the board, And if you were to do it for 3 or 4, depending on which of these you have on, sorry. If you were to do it for 3, if you have Elemental Bond, or 4, if you have Garrick's Uprising on the board, then you are drawing however many cards, right? X is 5, then you draw 5 cards, essentially, because they all enter the battlefield. Let's see here. Temur Sabertooth, again, it just combos off with Zakama. Plus, if you really need to send Pantlaza back, you could use it. Force another cast just in case you want to discover again. It's not the most efficient use of the ability, but we have so much mana that being efficient isn't super, super important. I mean, it's still important, but it's not like our primary concern. Let's see here. Contest of Claws and Zoyoa's Justice. This is just a Prey Upon, but it has some potential discover, I should say, stapled onto it, which, I mean, that works for our theme. So Yoa's Justice is just a Chaos Warp, but again, it has Discover stapled onto it. I will say that it is a detriment to us to let our opponent discover if we use that on them. Which, I mean, if you need to get rid of something, you need to get rid of something, right? At least you have the option. Just know that they will be pulling something off the top when you do. Personally, I use it on my own stuff to force another Discover. That's probably not the best way to go about it, though. I'll be real with you. That's probably a super irresponsible way to use it. But, I mean, you want more Discover, you use it. Let's see what else. Oh, Scapeshift. Scapeshift is here and not in ramp because it doesn't actually ramp us. We don't have a ton of lands that... We have one single land that taps for 2, and that is Temple of the False God. It's a $12 card. You don't need to have it in here. I put it in here because it'll let us look for some of our land pieces. Testing Wolf Run or Sanctum of Eternity, which we will get to later. Oops. But again, not super useful. I mean, not super necessary. It is useful. You could easily drop this. Just put it in another. Again, if you drop anything, just throw in either ramp or a draw piece. Or if you're not comfortable with the 35 lands that I have in the deck, throw in another land. A lot of the cards in here are pretty like flexible in what you can include. There's nothing in here that's super, super necessary besides your like flicker spells, because those are so limited in our colors. I mean, I shouldn't say limited because blue and white are the 2 primary flicker colors, but like white only has half of them. So it's not like we have like a ton of options. All right, ramp. Nothing too terribly important with ramp. It's what you would expect. One thing to note is that a lot of our ramp will look for specific subtypes, not necessarily basics, which is why we are running as many of the subtypes that come in, you know, conditionally untapped as possible. Everflowing Chalice can either come down early for 1 mana or come down late for just a big amount of mana later on. Our Immersion Sequence I'm probably going to replace because having a land come in as a creature means that when you inevitably wipe the board, this land will also die. I only included it in here because I had it on hand and it's a 2-drop ramp piece, which will help us early. Not so much late game. That said, it's not too bad to have in here because by the time we are casting those pieces, we should have so many lands that losing one isn't going to be a big deal. Besides that, I just have a bunch more, you know, your generic ramp pieces. You got Kadama's Reach, we got Rampant Growth, we got, you know, the pay for drop 2 lands. Endless Restoration is a good one because chances are if we're like pulling this off the top with Pantlaza, Pantlaza will be on the board for this thing to see and give us 3 lands back. That said, you shouldn't feel too bad about playing it early for just 2 if you really need to, right? Beyond that, nothing too special here. This battle will probably never get flipped. We just don't have the sort of power to force the flip unless someone else is just not playing like a creature-based deck or they're just playing poorly. That said, if you can get a flip, the other side is just a mana dork that has haste. If you're able to flicker that, like with a mass flicker, then you get the front side again, which is nice. It's not going to happen too often, but if it does, great. And then we skip lands. So let's go to lands. I did try this with a bunch of basics only. and it was fine. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but at the same time, like it was workable. Like I had a bunch of greens in there, and they just ramped me to all my colors. Um, it was just a little more inconsistent, which is to be expected. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you just hate building mana bases, you could do it, honestly. Besides that, I just put in all the lands that have the subtypes and have the possibility to come in untapped. So you've got, you know, Stomping Grounds and Temple Garden. These are definitely the more pricey ones. You could just replace them with basics, or else replace them with the ones that come in tapped. I forget what they are in these colors, but they exist. Temple of the False God. This, I know some people don't like. I know a lot of people don't like this. I think it's fine. We put down enough lands that hitting this 5 or more isn't too big of a deal. Plus, we're not going to be hurting for our colors. It does suck to get early, but I think it's a decent trade-off to make, I think. Reliquary Tower is more of a comfort pick because, you know, it's not too hard to discard cards with this deck, right? Like if we have 8 cards in hand, there's usually one in there that we know we can afford to get rid of. If we are using Pantlaza's trigger to put stuff in hand rather than cast it immediately, there's a chance we're going to go above hand limit, which this helps, but again, it's not super necessary. The only time I would say I really want this is if I'm going off on an infinite draw combo, in which case I don't want to be dumping half my deck. That being said, if I'm drawing infinite cards, I should just be winning the game at that point. So again, Reliquary Tower, it's a comfort pick. Replace it if you don't want it. Sanctum of Eternity. This one is here for Zakama and for our commander. And I guess for anything else that has a good ETB, but primarily those two. It'll let us play Pantlaza multiple times. We will have the mana to do that by the time we hit turn, 6 or 7? And with Zakama, it just goes infinite. So yeah, obviously. Kessig Wolfrun and Lair of the Hydra. These are just here to be mana sinks. If we can't hit any of our key pieces, if we are just bricked but have a ton of mana, we dump it all into these guys and start swinging, because like at least it gives us the option. I wouldn't recommend dropping them because having that option is pretty valuable, but at the same time, if you don't like the fact that Lair of the Hydra comes in tapped, or that Kessig Wolfrun is a colorless source, you can just replace them with whatever you want. Probably basics is my guess, just so they have the, you know, the type to look for. I mean, just so your ramp can hit them, rather. Personally, I wouldn't, you know, these are not such big setbacks that they're worth worrying about most of the time. You're mostly going to be hurting with these if you like are getting like flooded with a certain color and can't hit the colors you need, which, as I've said before, it's not going to be a huge deal for us. Besides that, Exotic Orchard, in the event that we're running 3 colors, someone's got to have one of ours, right? Ideally. And then just a bunch of these lands that tap for all of our colors, just out of necessity. But yeah, that is the basic build of the deck. All we're really doing is ramping to Pantlaza, then using Pantlaza to ramp even further until we can play our big mana sinks to ideally win the game. Or at the very least, keep people's boards clear for long enough that we just accrue so much advantage that they cannot contend. One or the other. I think it's fine. It's played well in the games I played it, though I haven't had many options to play. I mean, like, I haven't been able to take it out very often. I played one Commander Night with this deck, and it did okay. Okay, so in terms of strengths and weaknesses, right? Our strengths are that we don't have to worry so much about draws, right? Because that is basically what Pantlaza is doing for us. It's less draw and more card selection off the top, but at the same time, it puts cards either in our hands or on the field, which gives us an advantage. And of course, we don't need to worry about ramp, which is very nice because we are in green. On top of that, we are not as dependent on our board state as other Naya decks are. Like, Naya decks typically want to just cheat out a bunch of stuff and then overrun the board with swings, right? Which means a board wipe will send them back to the Stone Age until they're able to rebuild. With Pantlaza, that's not necessary. We basically, as long as we have Pantlaza on the field and a flicker spell, we're good. We're fine. Perfectly okay. That being said, the big weakness here is if we, whatever reason, can't get Pantlaza down, whether it's for like an oubliette or a trapped in the moon, imprisoned on the moon, and Pantlaza is just stuck, we are going to have a hard time to actually do anything. Other weaknesses would include blue. I mean, this color combination just folds to blue. They counter our shit. We can't really respond to that, right? Don't play into open mana. That's, I mean, that's not even a commander thing. That's just a general thing. If you can avoid it, don't play into open mana, right? Beyond that, we don't really like decks that start fast and will be hitting us early because a lot of our removal is going to come later in the game. It shouldn't be too much of a problem unless people are specifically focusing you down. It's not a very good archenemy deck. Like if you're getting focused down by the table, you just die. But if it's just one or two people, you could probably stave them off for long enough until you can hit one of your removal stuff. What are they called? Board wipes. Oh, and as a quick note, if you pull any of these flickers off the top with Pantlaza, unless you already have one in hand, it's better to hold it. Assuming you have the mana, it's better to hold it than to cast it immediately because, you know, if they try to target Pantlaza, you just flicker it. But all of that being said, let's go ahead and do a quick play test. Just to see, you know, how this thing goes. We'll go to turn 7, which I think is probably around the time you'd want to be winning, like looking to win the game. Earlier even, but I'd say 7 is a good stopping point. Now, this is a pretty good hand for us. 4 lands and ramp. I'd say it's fine. We don't have flickers, but ideally we'll be drawing into that. And if not, hey, maybe Pantlaza will grab us one. And that's one of the more pressing issues with the deck. If you can't get a flicker into hand, you are going to have a hard time. Because that's primarily how we do things, like how we get value. That said, another thing is not having enough lands or ramp to start, because while this will make you a ton of mana late game, or in the mid to late game, not having your starting mana to at least get Pantlaza down early is going to be rough. You are going to have trouble. So if your mana base isn't great, I would suggest aggressively mulling. But for us, this is fine. So let's go ahead and draw for turn. Jungle Shrine for turn, pass. And there's our flicker source. Again, the flicker is on the rescue the full. Unfortunately, Pegasus Guardian will be the cost that it sees when for Pantlaza, so we can actually discover it off the top. But again, we don't have a lot of options when it comes to these flicker spells, so it's got to go into the deck. Let's see here, turn 2. Let's go ahead and put down Cinderblade. We don't need to have it come in tapped, or untapped rather, so we'll let it come tapped. Pass. Canopy Vista. Yeah. Now, I kind of misjudged it. This is a bit of a slow start just because I didn't realize this was a 4-drop. It's fine. We'll go ahead and just foretell this Cosmic Intervention. Force Return, then we just crack 4 and cast this. Now, this does look for forests, and they come in untapped. The untap doesn't matter for us right now because we can't really make use of it. But our forest will be Jetmir's Garden. And again, these are like, Jetmir's is one of the more pricey lands. You can just replace it with whatever you want. I would recommend either one of the tapped lands that have the subtypes or just the basics. What was it? Jetmir's, and what do we already have? Cinderglade and a Canopy. So Stomping Grounds, I guess? We want white, so whoops. We want white, so what is the white Temple Garden? And we'll just have them both come in tapped. Pass, turn 5, play a land. We have 7 mana. We can safely play Pantlaza and still have mana to play Pegasus Guardian if we need to. Or rather, Rescue the Foal if we need to. But that does make me want to talk about something. If you are at a point where you only have 5 mana, right? You are playing very, very risky if you cast Pantlaza right away. Because this is probably the most vulnerable point in the game for us. Right? Because if you cast Pantlaza and then you discover 4, and you don't discover either a flicker spell, or no, sorry, a ramp spell. If you don't discover a ramp spell, you are hosed. If he gets removed, you have no guarantee that you're ever gonna be able to cast it again. And if you can't cast it again, your deck does almost nothing. So ideally, you want to have resources and a flicker spell in hand just to be absolutely safe. That said, if you do hit a ramp spell, you're pretty solid. That said, it's not something that I would risk. In any case, he enters the battlefield, we'll discover 4. I accidentally saw the soul ring off the top. We'll just play that. And then we just pass a turn. It's turn 5. We have a bunch of mana down, and we're passing. Now, at this point, I wouldn't super recommend casting Rescue the Fool. It's good to have protection in hand just in case. That said, our hand is not looking too stellar right now, so maybe risk it. We can always play Raptor next turn for another to force another Discover if we need to. But for now, we wait until the last person's end phase, and then we go ahead and cast the sorcery or the Rescue the Fool portion of this adventure. He gets flickered. We look for the top 4. I mean, not top 4. I look for 4 off the top. So the problem with play testing is that you don't know what your opponents have on the board. With this, it's weird, right? Because if you were to assume the best possible option, where 4 is you have a 0 power thing and you deal 4 damage, you score 4 off the top. That's good for us, right? On the other hand, if it's the worst possible option, it's not really the worst because we're discovering for 1. Well, I mean, at this point, we have Soul Ring on the field. So if I knew we had Soul Ring on the field and they don't have something I can hit for at least 2, I probably would just put it in hand. But even if we're hitting for 2, there's a lot of stuff in here that we want to be hitting for 2. You know, lots of our flickers are, I mean, not lots, but a good amount of our flickers, I think 3 or 4 of them, are 2-drops. Ramp, a lot of our ramp is 2-drop. So this, for 2, bare minimum, is perfectly fine. When I playtest, I like to assume worst case scenario, and that would be that there's just nothing for me to hit. Either nothing for me to hit or nothing that would actually give me a Discover off of it, so I can put it back into hand. And for that reason, this thing does not get played a lot. This thing does not get played a lot when I playtest. In actual practice, it's significantly different because people typically will have weak stuff on the board. Land for turn. Let's go ahead and play this guy. Okay, we don't use our white mana because that is the color of our flickers. Red is probably the one that's safe to use just because most of our red spells are going to be sorcery speed. So we don't need to like cheat anything, or not cheat anything, but like surprise people with flash spells. In any case, Ripjaw comes down. We go ahead and Discover for 5. That was a very good drop. So we pulled Conjures off the top. We can cast immediately. And this thing is great in this deck because it'll basically double our Discovers per turn, right? So we go to end phase. You have to flicker Pantlaza because its ability will only happen once per turn, which means by flickering it, you reset. Discover another 4. Yeah, this has to go in hand. I would like to cast it right now, but it's got to go in hand just to protect our stuff. Also, don't forget, we do have this in the grave, or sorry, in the exile for Tell Pile. I would like to avoid using it as much as possible. At least until we have like multiple things on the board that have good ETBs. But yeah, we pass, and then by the end phase of the last person's turn, again, you want to play at the last possible moment. We just acrobatic maneuver this Raptor. This will resolve first, so we draw a card, then we Discover for 5. That's got to go into hand, right? Like every time you pull one of these flickers, it always goes to hand. It's safer to have it in hand than to, you know, blow it immediately. Right, so let's go ahead and cast this thing. Discover for 4 for that. Right, so we're turn 7. We're sitting pretty comfortably. Now, we haven't won the game. We're not even close to winning the game, I don't think, but we have enough mana to just cast Earthquake right now. 6. We're casting Earthquake for 6, unless someone else is playing just massive Stompy. Actually, no. Let's take all of that back. Because I pulled Crackle of Power. So, I didn't realize we were in turn 7, but turn 7, assuming this was where we think the game would end, rather than play this guy, I would have played Earthquake to wipe the board, just for safety. Because at least that buys us time. That said, if we were to continue, then I would absolutely play Bronzebeak and get the Discover off the top, and then just, I don't know, Kodama's Reach probably for the finish, and then finish my turn. I know I said we would stop at 4, but let's just go ahead and continue, see what happens, right? Or at 7, I mean. But this is our board state at 7. Actually, no, technically this was our board state at 7, right? This was on top. This was our board state at 7, but we played this guy. Have this in hand now. Would it be worth it to, yeah, it would actually be worth it. I think this is I believe this is a 3. It's a 2, yeah. So 1, 2, 3, we go ahead and cast Kodama's Reach. We look for some lands. I know I said we'd stop at 7, but I just want to keep going, honestly. Oh wait, no, under sand. I don't remember if I played a land this turn or not. I'm gonna assume I did. Yeah. And I mean, we have enough mana to cast our stuff, right? In case they threaten us later. If the board was looking spicy, I probably would have just Earthquaked. Otherwise, play the Bronzebeak and just keep moving on. I can slay. Sorry. Why am I am zoning out right now. Holy shit. I can slip on the ring at any point to force another trigger. But that's basically just the deck. This is basically how the deck would play, ideally. Well, I mean, ideally you would have a bit more ramp than this by turn 7. You don't really want to be drawing into these sorts of, or at least not Crackle Power specifically, because this is a finisher. Earthquakes are fine to draw into. The board wipes are fine to draw into. Like I said, even if Pantlaza dies, you have enough mana to summon it at least another 2 times before you're starting to starve. And every time she comes down, there's a very good chance that you're just pulling ramp off the top anyways. The goal of the deck is to just drown your opponents in value, because I didn't want to go Stompy. I don't know if the Stompy version of the deck is better. It might be, but honestly, I really wanted to take advantage of this Discover 4. I do have an iteration of this deck that focuses more on these sorts of Earthquake effects, where you just pay a bunch of mana and deal damage to a bunch of stuff. And rather than running like Zakama or Gelatinous Genesis, I have just all of these sorts of spells. I can't really decide if it plays better or not, but I mean, it's funny, right? You just kill everyone at the same time, which I don't know if that, if that's your goal, I would count that as a win for me, right? In any case, that's the deck. I think it's pretty solid. Like I said, I played it like a handful of times at last week's Friday Night Magic, and it performed fairly well for a deck that I only just picked up, or not picked up, but put together. I actually won a game, which, I mean, I think that's fantastic to begin with. Oops. Yeah, that's a deck. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts on this one. If you have any suggestions, throw them in the comments. If you have critiques, yeah, throw them in the comments. If you just want to ask questions or just talk about it, throw it all in the comments. I spent a lot of time on this deck, putting this deck together, just because I was really racking my brains to think of a win con for this guy. And I just ended up with slap them in the face with damage, which, you know what? It's not the worst thing in the world. We can make it work. But yeah, that's a deck. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.